Below zero, everything's covered in white. Happy holidays, we won't make it out tonight. The heater broke an hour ago, but my wish still came true. I'm happy to be freezing cold with you. Ooh, ooh. Perfect holiday is one with you.
Well, this week we're in the second part of a series called Christmas Pictures. If you're new here, what we like to do is we take our messages, we clump them together under some common theme, and we call it a series. And so this week we're in the second part of a series, and we're talking about Christmas pictures, right? Like those pictures where everybody gets done up nice, all polished and buttoned up, and then you take a picture and you send it to all your friends and family, and it's usually got like some kind of greeting, a little Christmas slogan on the bottom, like Merry Christmas or Peace on Earth or something like that, right? And Christmas pictures over the past couple years, or at least in my lifetime, have really evolved. Like when I was a kid, it was a whole ordeal, my mom would get like an outfit for my brother and I, and it was the same. We're matching, for whatever reason, we're in the same exact thing. And then we got to go to the mall, and there was some place in the mall where we were going to get pictures taken. And we'd walk in, there'd be some studio, and there'd be like, the picture of the fireplace. So you're taking a picture of a picture with the flashing umbrellas. And this was before you could take a zillion pictures with a smartphone. So to go to a place like that where they're taking hundreds and you could just pick the perfect one, that was the thing. Now they've changed a little bit. Now it's a little bit more common to go out and, take pictures a little more naturally. Like you see people outside in fields of grain and on the beach in sweaters, and it's fun. But the idea is like, okay, let's take a picture of our family and send it out to the world. And so last week, if you were here, I showed you a picture of the last time we took a Christmas picture. This is in 2017. If you haven't got one from us since then, it's because we haven't taken one since then, all right? And this is a Christmas picture. For us, everything is just right. Like I'm not looking at the camera, but candid, like just enough not looking at the camera. My daughter, she's smiling. My son, he's not happy, but he's just enough not happy, right? Like it's perfect. And then my wife just looks great looking at the camera, and it's all perfect. But what I told you about my Christmas picture, maybe this is true of your Christmas pictures, is that there's a story that this picture isn't telling. And it's a story of tears. It's a story of frustration. And even just there's a little bit of relational tension as well. There's a story that the picture's not telling, but eventually we got to the place where the finished product looked like this. And what I told you last week, this is a major confession. I'd never shared this publicly before, but this picture actually was photoshopped. We took my wife and son from one picture and my daughter and I from another. We put it together and we're like, all right, that'll work. And we just sent that out to the world like, this is what we're really like, And so yeah, the idea is that this moment, it never actually happened. Here's another Christmas picture, and you're probably familiar with some version of this. It's the more classic one. You've got the three wise men, right? The kings, the magi. You got Joseph, baby Jesus in the manger, Mary, a little lamb, but that's not Mary's little lamb, that's a different story. Then you got two shepherds over here with the lamb, and they're in some kind of barn or covering, and that star is just dead center right on the money. And it's picture perfect. Now, if you're with us last week, I think it's important for me to reiterate, I'm not in any way against this picture, right? It is a really cool, way to remember the Christmas story. However, this picture gives off some real vibes of Silent Night and Peace on Earth. We've taken a little bit of our polished, perfect approach to Christmas pictures and kind of put it on this picture. And if we're not careful, we can miss the story that this picture is supposed to tell. And it's a story that is more real and uncertain and scandalous and relatable than the picture perfect Christmas story. In fact, what I would argue is that this moment right here never actually happened. At least not in the way it looks. And so last week, if you were with us, we talked about Mary. We talked about how this idea, the way we read and hear the Christmas story, Mary is in this amazing position of privilege. She's got the opportunity to be the mother of the Savior, the hero everyone has been waiting for. But for her, it would have been like, oh yes, but oh no at the same time. Because at that time, in that culture, to be pregnant and to not be married was a huge, huge deal. Not just because of their values in that culture, but because of the way they understood the history of their people, the history of Israel. Like they understood the lineage and the genealogy to be one of the most important things about who they were. And so to go outside of anything but a traditional relationship was a really, really big deal. And people weren't buying the story that something miraculous happened inside of her. We read that and we're like, yeah, well, it's in the Bible. There was a miracle and it came from, an angel told her this was going to happen. We expect it because it's in the Bible where stuff like that happens. But for her, this was just regular life. And we're even told in this story that no one had heard from God in 400 years. So no one's believing her story. And at that time, what was so difficult for her is she would have almost immediately lost all her friends. She may have been disowned by her family. In fact, at different points in ancient Jewish culture, you could be killed for this. So she may have even feared for her life. She tells Joseph, her future husband, the man she's pledged to be married to, and he doesn't buy it, which is understandable. Until eventually there's an angel that gets him on board with this whole thing. And then they take a journey. It's a journey that's 90 miles long to the city of Bethlehem. And there, when she gets there, we're told that there was no room for them. Maybe no room in an inn. Maybe no one wanted to take them in. Because Joseph was showing up back to his hometown with his pregnant girlfriend, and there weren't many people that were willing to take that in. And so she gives birth. Here's what we read. This is one of the most overlooked verses in the entire Christmas story. It says she wrapped him, Jesus, in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. Manger, a lot of us think of manger and we're like, oh yeah, that's a little ancient version of a crib. But it wasn't. It was an ancient version of a feeding trough where animals ate. It was closer to a dog dish than it was a crib. And so for her to put her newborn baby, if you've ever had a baby, you know how scary it is when you have that new life in front of you. What state emotionally would you have to be to wrap a baby up and put it down in a place where animals ate? For her, the manger was not something to be celebrated. It's not something she wanted in her Christmas picture. It was a sign of exhaustion, isolation, maybe even resignation. And so the question we asked last week was if even Mary, the mother of Jesus, had a manger in her story, what's the manger in your story? Maybe it's something in your life you wouldn't have asked for, you didn't want, you'd hope people don't talk about when they tell your story, but it's an unfortunate reality you got to deal with. And what's the meaning in the manger in the story? And so that's where we were last week. This week we're looking at the same story, but from a different perspective. Not from Mary, but from the point of view of Joseph. The father of Jesus, the man who raised him. When we meet Joseph, we're told that he's got plans. He's got dreams. He's hoping to marry this girl, Mary. And this is exciting for him, not just because he's going to have a companion, but because for him, he's finally going to be able to start his own family and take his rightful place in the lineage of ancient Israel. This was a big deal, and it was finally his time. But then he gets news, maybe from Mary, maybe from someone else, that Mary's pregnant. And in an instant, his dreams and his heart are broken. It's this feeling of betrayal. Well, now what? And at that point in that culture, like I said, at times you could be killed for something like this. Like Mary could have literally lost her life. What probably would have been the norm would be a public shaming. We're told in the story that Joseph, he could have literally scheduled a shaming session for Mary in the place that they lived, where people would come out and just shame her. But he didn't want to do that, we're told, because he was a righteous man. He was a good guy. And so he decided he would just end the relationship quietly. And while the news would be public, her disgrace would not be. Until there's an angel that meets with him and says, no, this is the real deal. Take Mary to be your wife. You really are going to be the father of the hero everyone's been waiting for. And for him, it's another one of those moments like, oh yes, oh no. Because now it's not like everything gets better. Now, Joseph is entering into the difficulty that Mary's living with. And so now the two of them are in it together. He could have lost his business, been cut off from his family, his friends. This was a rough time to be in that kind of situation. And so as all of this is happening, right, they get news from Rome, which is the superpower that governed the entire world at that time, and Rome loved it. They loved the power that they had, and so they liked to count how many people they were literally ruling over. And so we're told, according to Luke, who writes down the Christmas story for us, he says this. He says, in those days, Caesar Augustus, okay, remember this, in blue. Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. They want to count the people they have in that territory. And so what does that mean? Well, it says that this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, meaning Luke's writing this down to people who were alive when this happened. He's like, remember that? Like, okay, so there was the second census. This was the first one. He's saying during this time, this is when that happened. And everyone went to their town to register, their own town to register. So Joseph, we're told, also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David. Now, this is a lot of geography here, but the idea is that Joseph is going back to his hometown, to Bethlehem, what they referred to as the town of David, because David, from David and Goliath, the king David, that's where he grew up. It was the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. So Joseph's got to go back home because of this census that's happening here. Now, this is wildly inconvenient. At this point in the story, Mary is in her third trimester, and they have to go on a journey that is literally 90 miles or somewhere around there. I don't know if you've taken a 90-mile journey in your third trimester, but this was not in a Chevy Suburban. This was likely on foot, maybe on a donkey, possibly in a carriage, but probably not because they didn't have much money, and we know that about their family. And so she's got to go out and he's taking her, his pregnant fiance, all the way back to Bethlehem. It would have been dangerous, it would have been cold, it would have been scary, it would have been uncertain. But this is what he's got to do. And when he gets there, we're told there's no room for them. Maybe because everyone was back in Bethlehem for the census, maybe because no one would take them in. And so Mary's like, it's time, and when it's time, it's time. And so he finds shelter in some sort of barn or maybe a cave, but there, Joseph delivers the baby. Totally alone, probably on the ground, with no support, no loved ones around, right after a 90-mile trip, which would have taken days, some people think even weeks. I remember when my daughter was born, she's my oldest, I was terrified. I was in a hospital surrounded by professionals. I was standing there. I didn't have anything to do. I was just there to kind of be. And the doctor looks at me at one point. My face was turning white. And then the nurse, like there was this scramble for them to go find a grilled cheese sandwich. And they come like running into, and I got to do nothing. Right? If I'm Joseph, there's no Christmas story. Joseph does this all on his own. At that time, it was common in the ancient world for women to die during childbirth. It was common for children to die during childbirth. This is scary. But there's a census, and so he's got to go. So there, Jesus is born. Well, it doesn't end there. Like, not long after that, they have to get back on the road. They go to Jerusalem, probably twice. Probably once when Jesus was 8 days old. Probably again when he was 40 days old. And they meet some people named Simeon and Anna. And that's a different story. But they get back on the road and they travel. And then they have these people come to see them. And you're probably familiar with these people. You know, we refer to them as the wise men or the magi. And their story is for another time. But they show up looking for the king of the Jews. And in their search, they tell this guy named Herod, who currently had the title King of the Jews. They show up and they ask Herod, hey, where's this new king of the Jews being born? Herod is an insecure and power-hungry leader. He freaks out and decides to have all the babies 2 years and younger killed in Bethlehem, just to make sure, in case these people are right, that there was no threat to his power. And so here's what happens. When those magi, those wise men were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, get up, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Why? Well, the angel says, stay there until I tell you, for Herod, blue name, remember that, is going to search for the child to kill him. And so they take this trip now to Egypt. This is a 70-mile trip. It's not as long as the original trip from Nazareth to Bethlehem, but it's another scary trip, and this time there's a child. And when they get to Egypt, he's got to start over. Like Joseph has to build a life for his family. He's in a strange culture with people he doesn't know and a new family, and he's got very, very little to provide for them. And they're on the road, and they spend years in Egypt. And then they move again, and we're told, after Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother. This is a very forceful angel. He's very clear about his orders. Take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel. For those who were trying to take the child's life are dead. But then there's this slight change of plans. It says, but when Joseph, when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. All right? Now, I know that's a lot of names and places, right? Probably hard to digest, but here's what you need to know, right? They go from Bethlehem, from Nazareth to Bethlehem because of Caesar and his census. They then go to Egypt from Bethlehem because of Herod. They then travel from Egypt back to Nazareth, which was now 140 miles. This is like the big trip. And that's because of this other guy, Archelaus. And he's bouncing from one place to the next. Now that stinks, right? That's no fun. In fact, let's put that picture of the Christmas story right there. Okay, see this barn here, right? This was the last place that Joseph wanted to be, I promise. This was not where he wanted to bring his pregnant fiance. This was not where he wanted his son to be born. This is not the kind of life he wanted to offer. And then from there, they're constantly on the road. Not only does that stink, but in the ancient Jewish culture, there was this way things were done. You see, if you were a man and you were engaged to a woman, then you would leave where you were and you would prepare a place for your future family. You might build it yourself. You might look for one, you might purchase one, but you are preparing a place for you and your family. In fact, Jesus uses this language when he's talking to his followers. He says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. This is what he's talking about. So the future husband would go and prepare a place, and then they'd get married, and they'd move in, and their family would grow, and they'd live happily ever after. And it would be great. For Joseph to know he's going to start a family, need to prepare a place, but then have to take a 90-mile journey, only then to be shipped off to Egypt where he doesn't know anyone and he's got to figure out how to make money, then to come all the way back to Nazareth, it would be this constant feeling of inadequacy and shame, like he's unable to do what he needs to do as a husband. And so I promise you, this barn here was the last place he wanted to be, but it was the first place in a list of last places he wanted to be. It would have been difficult for him. Rough. And so if you were to stop and ask Joseph, why are you in Bethlehem? Do you know what he would say? He would say, well, Caesar, the census. If you were to ask Joseph, why are you in Egypt? You know what he would say? Well, Herod is hunting for my son. If you were to ask Joseph on that 140-mile journey back to Nazareth, like, Joseph, why are you on the road again? He would say, well, Archelaus, just like his father Herod. Like to Joseph, it was very clear where he was, why he constantly found himself in the last place he wanted to be. You know what's interesting? Luke records this story, but so does another guy, another follower of Jesus named Matthew. And there's something Matthew wants his readers to see throughout Joseph's crazy journeys. If you were to ask Matthew who was friends with Jesus, Matthew who knew what was going on behind the scenes, Matthew, why was Joseph in Bethlehem? Do you know what Matthew would say? In fact, he does say, he says, well, this is what the prophet has written. Now, what he's referencing there are the ancient Hebrew scriptures. Hundreds of years earlier, all of these people had been told that a hero was coming and this is what he's going to look like. And so Matthew references this prophet and says he wrote hundreds of years ago. Why is Joseph in Bethlehem? Here's why. But you in Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. Watch. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. If you were to ask Matthew, why is Joseph in Bethlehem? Matthew would say it might be the last place he wants to be, but it's exactly where he needs to be. And if you were to ask Matthew why he was in Egypt, in that foreign land with foreign people in a totally unknown culture, Matthew would say, oh, well, we covered that too, right? Like, so Joseph, Matthew writes, got up, took the child, and left his mother during the night. They left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet. In those writings, everyone had been reading for hundreds of years. What did he say? Out of Egypt, I called my son. Okay, fine, but Matthew, why then 140 miles? Like, if you got used to Egypt, why don't you just stay in Egypt? It's probably nice over there. Well, why would he go all the way back to Nazareth? And Matthew would say, well, he went and he lived in a town called Nazareth. Why? So it was fulfilled what was said through the prophets hundreds of years ago that he would be called a Nazarene. What Matthew's saying, I know there's a lot of details to this story. Matthew's saying, and what I think we need to know, what he wants his readers to know, and what he would want us to know, is that the last place Joseph wanted to be was the exact place he needed to be. In other words, there was a purpose to the position he was in. And what Joseph's story, though it's not clean, though it's not buttoned up, while it's not polished, and it doesn't go the way Joseph would have wanted it to go, what it invites us to do is ask the same question. Like, what if the last place you want to be is the exact place you need to be? And if I were to ask you, like, how'd you get to where you are right now? Maybe you don't want to be there. Maybe you're in a job you don't like, and if I say, how'd you get there? In the same way Joseph would say, well, Caesar, you would say, well, this is how I got here. But maybe if you step back and look at it, maybe a few years from now you step back and look at it, you'll say, no, there was a purpose to the position that I was in. And though I couldn't see it then, I can see it now. Maybe you received a diagnosis. Maybe you lost a job. Maybe there's a situation you would have never asked for, never saw coming, and it's you find yourself in the last place you'd want to be. Maybe it's the exact place you need to be. Maybe there are things you need to know that you wouldn't know if you weren't in the position you were in. Maybe there are things that you need to see that you wouldn't see if you weren't in the position you were in. Maybe there are things you need to do that you wouldn't do if you weren't in the position that you're in. And what we see over and over again is this theme coming up. We see it throughout the life of Jesus. We see it in the writings of followers of Jesus, where people are like, what's going on here? Why is this way? Like, someone comes up to Jesus one time with someone who can't walk, and he says, why? Like, did this guy do something? Did his parents do something? And in essence, what Jesus says, not with these words, but what he communicates is that there's a purpose to the position that he's in. And it's not to say that God is making bad things happen, or that he's the reason why there's all this evil we have to deal with on a regular basis, the brokenness in the world. But what we're taught over and over and over again is that God, in some crazy, unexplainable way, is using our brokenness, our misfortune, our difficulties, the things we would never want, and he's working them for good. There's a purpose to the position that you're in. And everything changes when we begin to see that. You know what I love about this, right? And here's the stuff that like really fascinates me. Even if you don't buy this, even if you're like, nah, I don't like church, I can't wait for this to be over, we're going to lunch after, right? Even if you don't believe in God and you're not bought into church and this is not your scene. Like recently, I read about a woman, she's from Yale, she's a professor. Her name is Dr. Amy, and her last name starts with a W, but there's like 19 letters and no vowels, so I'm not gonna try and pronounce it. But she studies the way people understand their work. She's not a person of faith, at least as far as I know. But she's dedicated her whole life to that. And she said there are people that see the things that they do, the things that they do from 9 to 5. Some people see it as a job. Some people see it as a career. And then there are some people that see it as a calling. Like, not necessarily to say that they're people of faith or of a certain religion, but there's this sense they believe, not that it was delivered from on high, like you gotta go do this and work there, but they believe that they're there for a reason. And what she argues is that it totally transforms the way that they live on a day-to-day basis. In other words, believing that there is a purpose to the position you're in will have dramatic changes in your life, whether you believe the Christmas story and everything about it or not. What if the last place you want to be is the exact place you need to be? That's the question that Joseph's story invites us to ask. We're about out of time, so I'm gonna ask the band to come back up here. But for me, like the way that, this is not a huge thing, it's not a big deal, but one way that I saw this in my own life was when my first semester in college. If you've been here for a while, you probably know that basketball was like a really big thing for me. It still is a big thing for me. And if you're new here, you probably just assume that basketball is a big thing for me because I look like a basketball player. But as long as I can remember, from like really 3rd, 4th grade, I had dreams of playing basketball at a high level in college. And I worked and worked and worked and worked and worked to try to play in school. And then eventually when it came time for me to figure out where I was gonna go, I met with coaches and made my decision largely because I wanted to play basketball. And so when I got to the school that I went to my freshman year, I met with the team right away. I met with the coach, and we began the preseason workouts. And I spent months with the team before the season started working. And then there came the official tryouts, which were the formality to finalize things. And the day came where the coach posted the list, the roster list on his door. It was an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And there was a list of the roster. And my name wasn't on it. There was a little smaller list at the bottom that was the reserves, and I was on that list, which is basically a nice way to say you didn't make the team, but you could still come to practice. But for me in that moment, that was the last place I wanted to be. Again, it's a small thing, it's a sport, but this is something I had been hoping for, planning for, and working for a large part of my life, and now I felt like, well, now what? Now what do I do? It's the last place I wanted to be. But eventually, because I didn't make that team, I ended up going to a different school. And the day that I got there, I met Allie, literally the day I got there, who would become my wife. And in that season of life, I started asking questions about God and what I believe. And I explored the things that didn't quite make sense to me. Eventually, things started to make sense. And then this whole idea of starting a church where people who have the same questions and hang-ups that I do was born. And like what I'm getting at here is, in the moment, as difficult as that situation was, like being in the last place I wanted to be, looking back, I don't know, but it feels like it was the exact place I needed to be. My life would look radically different if I had made that team. It felt like there was a purpose to that position. And so what is it for you? What does your Christmas picture look like this year? What position are you in right now? And how will seeing purpose in it change the way you approach that? It can be big things, big crossroads, major life decisions, or small things. Like maybe you're a parent taking care of a kid throwing a tantrum on a Wednesday night. How does your response change to that child when you believe maybe there's something I need to learn from this situation? Maybe there's something they need to learn from this. Maybe there's a purpose here, and it's not just something you're trying to get through. Changes everything when we believe that there's a purpose to the position that we're in.